I am acutely aware of my madness. It must be so. No sane individual would willingly engage in such an endeavor. Each day, I don my protective gear from head to toe, yet within my heart, there lies no trace of revulsion or unease. On the contrary, I feel an unsettling calm. A person of sound mind would not remain so tranquil. Even in the face of inevitable death, no one would willingly undertake this task. Yet, I find myself daily disposing of truckloads of corpses into the incinerator, as if this grim duty possesses a morbid fascination. I know I must be insane. The plague's onset remains shrouded in uncertainty. When the first case was unveiled, the gravity of the situation eluded the public's consciousness. Some foolish biologists even rejoiced at the discovery of yet another life form. As the molecular structure of the virus responsible for this calamity comprised silicon and a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, rather than carbon, in the initial stages of infection, aside from slight stiffness in the joints, there were no significant discomforts. However, 2 weeks later, the afflicted would suddenly become immobile, their skin transforming into silicon dioxide stone. Yet at this juncture, the individual was not deceased, their eyes could still blink. If such a person attempted to move, they could do so, but their skin would shatter like wax. I have witnessed several petrified corpses, their surfaces uneven and marred by bloodstains. Gradually, the internal organs would also undergo petrification, culminating in complete stone-like transformation by the 6th week. In other words, by around the 40th day, a living person becomes a statue. The origins of this virus remain unknown. Existing antibiotics are effective solely against protein-based viruses and have no impact on this particular strain. Even more terrifying is the virus' extreme contagiousness, capable of transmission through mere respiration. In its early stages, the absence of symptoms renders detection exceedingly difficult. One might walk through a crowd and unwittingly become infected. The sole antidote is alcohol. It can slow the virus activity, but at best, it merely prolongs the virus metabolic processes by a week. Even if one were to immerse themselves in alcohol, their lifespan would only extend by that same week. According to scientists, the petrification of the human body occurs due to the accumulation of the virus metabolic byproducts within the cells. Alcohol does not kill the virus, rather, it keeps it in a state of activity. Thus, alcohol is not a remedy, but resembles a drug. To put it plainly, as the virus remains active, it survives longer, resulting in a greater number of individuals coexisting within the body. Consequently, the corpses produced during their metabolic processes increase, leading to a more rapid petrification of the human form in the later stages. Regardless of the perspective taken, alcohol is perceived as a panacea by many. The consumption of alcohol has surged exponentially. Of course, the Statistics Bureau has long since ceased to function. The world has no nations to speak of. In the early days of the pandemic, certain nations, fortunate enough to evade discovery of the virus, gleefully blamed the governance of others for the calamity, only to later vehemently criticize the measures taken by those same countries when the virus arrived on their shores. Yet, as the pandemic spread like wildfire, no one uttered superfluous words. Regardless of ideology or governance, all stood equal in the face of this plague. In this context, a remarkable phenomenon of global unity emerged. Emergency response agencies were established, yet there was only one course of action: to isolate the infected and provide protective masks to the uninfected. Fortunately, the virus could not penetrate graphite filters, otherwise, humanity would truly have nowhere to flee. Upon the discovery of an infected individual, their mask was immediately confiscated. For the uninfected, a carrier of the virus was akin to a ferocious beast. These individuals were cast out, the affluent resorting to excessive drinking, regardless of their prior habits, while the impoverished resorted to robbery. In truth, robbery was unnecessary, as 2/3 of homes had already been abandoned, allowing for easy ingress and egress, with possessions left to be taken at will. My task was to manage the aftermath. In simple terms, it involved collecting the bodies that had turned to stone and transporting them to the outskirts for cremation. Lacking a cure, this was the only recourse to eradicate the virus. Engaging in this work not only heightened the risk of infection, but, more terrifyingly, we often encounter bodies not yet fully petrified. To cast such a body into the crematory furnace often elicited a heart-wrenching scream from within. 2 of my colleagues succumbed to their conscience and took their own lives. This was not a desirable occupation, yet it was a necessary one that I claimed to be mad because I not only feared those anguished cries, rather, with each statue I cast in, I harbored a desperate hope that it would emit that cry of despair. After all, not every statue was a mere lifeless form that I drove my large truck through the desolate streets. Today, I collected only 7 bodies, each of which I hoped would not scream in the furnace. As I passed the kindergarten, a man without a mask emerged, clutching a pile of belongings. Due to the smaller physiques of children, they succumbed to the virus effects far more swiftly than adults thus. There were no children left. However, there was neither a white sign indicating the absence of occupants nor a red sign indicating the presence of the ill at the kindergarten's entrance. A white sign denotes an uninhabited residence, while a red sign indicates the home of a patient. It is not unlawful for the afflicted to rob uninhabited homes. If he emerged from that kindergarten, it was likely deserted, otherwise he would be guilty of robbery, and I could justifiably execute him on the spot. I leaped from the truck, drew my gun, and commanded halt. He complied, staring at me. In his hands was a bundle of women's clothing. I said, "This is not an uninhabited residence. You have violated Article 8 of the Emergency State Law and must face the death penalty." The man's face contorted in anguish. Anyone capable of such a grimace could at least manage to run for another week. He remarked, "I don't know, I am new here. No need for explanations, you must accept the punishment." His face contorted in anguish, his features warped, and he began to curse foully. I fired in the echo of the gunshot. His head burst apart like a mass of decaying flesh, splattering in all directions, leaving a radiating stain upon the wall. His body, indeed a corpse, toppled backward. According to Article 8 of the Emergency Law, any individual entering the residence of the uninfected, regardless of the reason, is to be executed on the spot. This inhumane legislation received the unwavering support of all the uninfected and was thus enacted. I stepped into the kindergarten. In this era, the notions of life and death have lost their significance. Upon taking a life, I felt not a flicker of emotion. All that occupied my thoughts was the possibility that whoever had entered here had either perished or succumbed to infection. Regardless, I needed to ascertain the truth. "Is anyone there?" I called out. In the classroom, childish drawings adorned the walls. My home. Amid the exaggerated figures and landscapes, the innocence and charm of the child who had drawn them remained evident. Though the strokes were clumsy, it was clear that the subjects were uninfected. There was not a soul in sight. The blackboard bore the words, "One hand, one mouthful of rice," yet there was no sign of life. Perhaps this truly was an abandoned dwelling, and I had mistakenly taken a life. Yet, I felt no remorse. He had simply departed weeks earlier. I traversed several classrooms. At the back, a row of dormitories lay vacant. It appeared to be a desolate area. I still had a few signs in my vehicle that needed to be affixed here. As I contemplated my departure, a faint sound echoed from the hallway below. Initially, the space was a storeroom, devoid of occupants. What could possibly emanate from there? By now, the rats had long since perished, turned to stone, as their size rendered them far more vulnerable. Only the elephants had managed to survive the infection for an extended period. There was a basement. I pushed against the door, but it did not budge. Stepping back, I delivered a forceful kick, and with a resounding crash, the door swung open. Below lay what resembled a toy factory. I called it a toy factory because there were no fewer than 30 stone figures of children, frozen in various poses, even one seated upon a chamber pot. They had all long since turned to stone. I managed a wry smile. Each child weighed nearly 60 pounds, and with over 30 of them, that amounted to more than 1,800 pounds. This was no small feat. I lifted a little boy, clutching a toy car, onto my shoulder, preparing to exit the basement. "You cannot take them." A voice emerged from a well-concealed door in the wall. A woman stepped forth, clad in heavy protective gear. I halted. "Is there someone else? Why didn't you come out earlier?" She scrutinized my face hidden behind a mask, as if attempting to pierce through my facade of depravity and shamelessness. Slowly, she replied, "Are you the crow?" I could not help but smile wryly. Crow is the colloquial term used by the common folk to refer to us, derived from our black protective attire, in stark contrast to the usual white, and our actions reminiscent of. "The mournful crow. Perhaps," I replied. "Are you planning to take them away?" I glanced at the stone figure in my arms, resembling a large doll, and remarked, "This is no mere artifact. Are you intending to incinerate them? What alternative do you propose? Please contact the Emergency Response Department at 010-8894. "I am not discussing that with you," she retorted, a hint of irritation in her voice. "You cannot take them away." "Miss," I said, "please refrain from letting your emotions cloud your judgment. As the ancients said, severing ties must be done decisively. They have long ceased to possess life and are as perilous as a ticking time bomb. Can you assure yourself of safety by concealing them here?" She exclaimed in anger. "That is incorrect. They are not dead." I found her naivety amusing. I had encountered numerous sentimentalists like her, and if left to their whims, humanity's extinction would have been imminent. I countered, "A person is transformed into a statue. How can you claim they're not dead?" "They're not dead," she asserted. "They have merely assumed another form of existence. Just as our human bodies contain minimal cellulose, one cannot declare that the majority of a plant's composition, which is cellulose, renders it lifeless." I felt my temper flare. Was she truly this unreasonable? Although the government advised employing extreme measures when confronted with irrationality, I was reluctant to draw my weapon. I said, "Miss, you claim they possess life. Do they exhibit any life functions?" "Plants may be stationary, yet they still grow. They do not move," she replied, "but they exist in this form of life, operating under a different perception of time. What we perceive as 1 second may be a day, a month, or a year for them. However, we cannot strip them of their right to exist simply because their movements are slow." I chuckled softly. "Miss, scientists have long established that once a person becomes petrified, they are devoid of life, akin to the artworks in a park. If you wish to become a piece in the Louvre, the opportunity abounds." She screamed, "They are deceiving you." Gripping my hand, she urged, "Come, let me show you the evidence." Through her thick gloves, I felt her hand soft yet firm. I was taken aback and asked, "Have you been infected?" She offered a wry smile. "Yes, it has been 2 days. Based on the average rate of infection, I likely have 5 days left to live, which is why I need you to see this." She revealed to me the image of a little girl perched on a chamber pot. The child bore a peculiar expression that was all too familiar. Every individual, regardless of age, exhibits such a look after defecation. However, her hands were raised, and her bottom was not seated on the pot. This child has been petrified for 2 years. 2 years ago, before she was fully transformed, she sat on the chamber pot. Yet today, she appears as she does now. What do you think she wishes to do? I exclaimed, "Good heavens, she wants to stand up." She did not look at me, she merely stated yes. She knows she is finished and ought to stand up. Yet, time seemed to stretch infinitely for her. In her mind, these 2 years were but a fleeting moment spent perched upon a chamber pot, and she was utterly oblivious to what had transpired. Our movements appeared too rapid for her comprehension, so swift that nothing was discernible. You cast her into the incinerator, and the agony she experienced during her cremation had not even reached her consciousness before she was reduced to ash. You asked, "Are you not killing?" I felt a slight dizziness. Statistically, I incinerate approximately 200 individuals each day. Why that calculation? Over the past 2 years, spanning more than 700 days, have I truly taken the lives of 14,000 souls? Perhaps she was lying? Yet I found it hard to believe. Petrification is not instantaneous. The critical transition from mobility to immobility takes roughly 30 minutes. I have witnessed many struggle in those 30 minutes, causing their skin to crack. This indicates that the little girl could not have remained motionless in a squatting position for that duration. Otherwise, her skin would have surely fissured. Yet, her skin now glistened, flawless enough to serve as a mirror. However, to accept that a person turned to stone could still move and think, with thoughts proceeding at a pace 1,000,000 times slower than flesh and blood, was beyond my imagination. That I am no intellectual, I do not place faith in the spoken words of others, no matter how terrifying or alluring they may be. I trust only what I can see. My hand reached for the holster. For matters I wish to remain oblivious to, the sound of gunshots serves as the most fitting response. Yet, I refrained from firing. I gazed in her eyes. Behind the protective mask lay a blend of compassion and defiance, as if I were merely a filthy insect. I averted my gaze and said, "Remove your protective suit, you are no longer worthy of wearing it." The following day, in the morning, I received a battalion of soldiers at a military barrack. On my way back, I took a moment to visit that kindergarten. She was hanging out laundry. I parked at the entrance, grabbed a package of food, and approached her. Her gaze remained somewhat hostile. "What do you want?" she inquired. "You have no food rations, so I brought you some." The food rations were also a measure of emergency response. As both plants and animals had turned to stone, food became exceedingly scarce, with each normal individual receiving only 18 kilograms of sustenance per month. Individuals like us, the crows, received an additional 10 kilograms due to a lack of willing workers. Infected individuals were immediately cut off from food supplies, left to fend for themselves. She gazed at me and asked, "Is it pity?" I glanced back at her, but soon found myself unable to meet her gaze. "It is respect," I replied, "that if that is truly how you feel, I simply wish for you to promise me one thing," she said. "What is it?" "When I become petrified, do not incinerate those children." I lifted my eyes to meet her hopeful gaze. and I could not bear to tell her the truth. Lowering my eyelids, I said, "Very well. I promise you that I could not reveal that my task was to collect the petrified bodies and subsequently burn them, regardless of whether they had transformed into another form of life or retained any semblance of sensation." Yet, I could only utter such words, granting her a fleeting, albeit unrealistic, solace in her remaining moments that I was uncertain of my actions, offering her my precious sustenance, which perhaps was foolish. Nevertheless, I felt an undeniable compulsion to do so. If I could not be a martyr, then I must simply remain an observer that a few days later, I returned to the kindergarten. Her garments still hung outside, indicating her immobility. As I descended the stairs, she stood at the doorway, arms outstretched, as if to bar my entry. Yet, she had become a statue. Even if she possessed awareness, she remained oblivious to my actions. Perhaps by the time she realized I had broken my promise, she would have already turned to dust. I gently moved her aside and began to retrieve the small statues one by one from within. When I finally approached her, I saw only disdain and hatred in her eyes. I could not bear to confront her, and instead, I carefully lifted her into the truck. In the past, I had handled such matters roughly, often causing arms and legs to fracture during my manipulations. However, this time, I treated her as if she were a fragile porcelain figure. I placed several of her old garments on the ground, allowing her to rest gently upon them. Then, I affixed a white sign at the entrance of the kindergarten. Upon returning to my dwelling, I unloaded the children from the truck, and instead of incinerating them, I felt a twinge of shame. I positioned her at the entrance of my abode. Amidst the white ash scattered from the crematory, she stood with her arms outstretched to my doorstep, her open embrace seeming to anticipate something, yet more so, to shield against an unseen force. Her exterior was exceedingly smooth, her attire somewhat tattered, yet did not evoke a sense of irreverence. However, her gaze was filled with disdain. The petrification of her eyes occurred later. Even after becoming immobile, they could still occasionally move. Yet, in a day or two, she would be entirely transformed. I felt a pang of guilt, recognizing that I was not a good person, for even after her transformation into stone, I intended to render her a mere ornament. As for the children, perhaps it would be best to wait until she was fully petrified before incinerating them. I dragged the other dozen statues to the crematory. As I cast them into the furnace, a mournful cry echoed. Yet, unlike before, I felt no solace, only a sharp pang in my heart. Even in their petrified state, they still existed. Their bodies merely lacked the softness of those yet untouched. Why do we have to strip them of their right to exist? Weighed down by sorrow, I returned to my dwelling. On the ground lay the children, scattered in disarray, that I carefully navigated around them and stepped inside. The following day, I ventured out once more to collect another load. On the road, I encountered a security inspector who, with great approval, added a star to my points card that I am now a 4-star member, and with just one more star, I shall gain entry into the emergency response department and become a security inspector myself. The inspector informed me that the number of uninfected individuals worldwide has dwindled to just over 500,000. However, due to effective measures, several regions have reported no new infections. It seems that the complete eradication of this plague is not an unattainable goal. Yet, amidst this good news, he also shared some troubling statistics. There are over 10,000 individuals like myself globally, with an average of a dozen suicides each month. Both the good and bad news weighed heavily on my heart. I disposed of the dozens of individuals I had collected into the crematorium. Perhaps, as she suggested, they still possessed life. Though I verbally dismissed the notion, I felt a flicker of doubt deep within. As I cast those stone figures into the flames, I could not shake the feeling of being an executioner. Upon returning to my dwelling, I was met by her gaze. Her expression had transformed. Perhaps it was merely my imagination, but I sensed that the disdain and betrayal that once filled her eyes had ebbed away if stone figures could indeed convey emotion. Was it because I refrained from incinerating those children? I glanced at the scattered little stone figures on the ground. One small girl lifting her skirt while her body lay sprawled on the ground, an absurd sight. I carefully arranged the figures, restoring them to their original forms as best as I could recall. Although there was no spittoon, the little girl managed to stand, her bottom jutting out due to the shift in balance. Once I had positioned the children properly, I approached her and spoke softly. "If you can still hear me, you should know that I have kept my promise." Of course, there was no response. I entered the room and allowed the intense ultraviolet rays of the sterilization chamber to wash over me. What is life? So fragile. Stone is far more resilient than my flesh and blood. Yet if they were still alive, they would merely be a burdensome pile of refuse, subject to my arbitrary destruction. But do I possess the right to do so? 23 days have passed. The stone figures I can gather are dwindling, with only a handful collected each day. If I were indeed a murderer, killing one each day is not fundamentally different from slaying 200. I encountered the security inspector again 30 days later. This time, he had deliberately waited for me. Strangely, he did not dare to seek me out at my residence. Perhaps he too had risen through the ranks of the crows. "Congratulations," he said, extending his hand as soon as he saw me. Through the thick gloves, I could feel the softness of his muscles. "Congratulations. After discussion, it has been unanimously decided that you shall become a security inspector. You have done commendably. This area has largely quelled the plague. Had I heard this news a month ago, I would have been elated. Yet now, I felt little excitement. Is that so? Thank you. Tomorrow, I shall take you to the headquarters of the Emergency Response Department. The headquarters of the Emergency Response Agency is situated in a northern city. Once a bustling metropolis with a population exceeding 10 million, it now harbors fewer than a few thousand souls. The headquarters building is enveloped by a vast, transparent dome, completely isolating it from the outside world. This dome consists of ionized air, and maintaining it requires a substantial daily consumption of energy previously stored. After undergoing rigorous disinfection, I finally gained entry. The headquarters sprawls across approximately 2 million square meters, akin to a small town. Within its confines, protective clothing is unnecessary, granting each individual an air of superiority. It is no wonder, for these individuals are predominantly figures from the upper echelons of the state apparatus. I was escorted to several locations for observation. The inhabitants live in peace and prosperity, with an abundance of food, and it bears little resemblance to a place afflicted by a pandemic. Currently, there have been no further discoveries of that virus within a 200 square kilometer radius. I was informed that it is anticipated that in 5 months, we will be able to dismantle the protective dome. In the center of the Grand Avenue stood a statue of a woman. She was a once celebrated movie star, now long since turned to stone, and among the first to be so. It is said that she contracted the virus upon returning from abroad. Yet, this statue is exquisitely crafted, lifelike in its detail. Are there fans of hers here? I inquired with a tinge of curiosity. Indeed, the director is quite fond of her films. As I approached and scrutinized the statue, I could not help but chuckle. Why not sculpt the clothing as well instead of draping the statue? Such a waste, merely for the sake of realism? I was taken aback. Wouldn't that pose a risk of the virus? Not at all. After rigorous examination, it has been established that 7 months post-petrification, the virus is no longer present in the body. She has been here for over a year. I smiled sheepishly. It seems our efforts are ultimately futile. Merely isolating would suffice to eradicate the virus. Not quite. Your incineration of the freshly petrified remains has significantly curtailed the virus spread. You have made a substantial contribution to humanity. Now, allow me to guide you to the food processing facility. I followed him to witness this center of the Emergency Response Agency, as external food is inevitably subject to contamination. Here, complete isolation from the outside world allows for peace of mind. At present, all rations for the unaffected populace originate from this facility, dispatched via a zero-gravity conduit to various locations. After a brief tour, we returned to the plaza. Sitting beside the fountain, he lowered his voice. This afternoon, the director wishes to meet with you for a personal discussion. You must align your words with his intentions. Why is that? At present, the director wields supreme authority, and none among us can defy his will. What will he say? His words may be difficult for you to accept, but you must exercise patience. This opportunity is rare. You must cherish it. A fleeting thought crossed my mind, and I remarked, "Are you suggesting that those who have turned to stone are still alive?" His expression shifted. Who informed you of this? My own complexion must have changed as I questioned, "Is this truly the case?" He remained silent, pressing me further. "Who told you? This is classified information." My voice rose slightly. "So it is true?" He met my gaze, but soon averted his eyes, lowering his gaze, and admitted, "Yes." "Speak softly. There are many people around." That I rose from my seat, gesturing toward the upright actress. In fact, she too is still alive, merely moving and thinking at a pace far slower than ours. He stood as well, conceding. "Indeed," he replied slowly and quietly. "A year ago, her hand was raised above her shoulder, but now it rests below it. The position of her feet has also shifted. So, for the past 2 years, have I been a murderer?" "There's no need to frame it so harshly," he replied. a mouse is still alive, yet you would have no qualms about drowning one if you caught it. They are not mice, they are human beings. He suddenly asserted with conviction, no, they're no longer human. Having transformed into another form of life, they become a different species. When they pose a threat to us, we are justified in eradicating them. Justified? A dry laugh escaped my throat. I recalled the woman's words. What is power? Merely a synonym for shamelessness that I end this power dynamic. I am but a small cog in a meat grinder. Even if I resist, I would merely prompt the machine's owner to replace a minor, inconsequential part. I declared, I wish to renounce my position as a security officer. He stared at me in disbelief. Are you mad? Do you realize that, although the chances of infection from crows are fewer, nearly 100 still occur each year? Only security officers. Thank you for your concern, but I believe I possess a remnant of something called conscience. He regarded me, placing a hand on my shoulder, saying, I understand I too ascended from the ranks of the crows. However, perspectives may differ for everyone. Please reconsider. I removed his hand, responding, it's unnecessary. I have contemplated this extensively, and oh, you remain overly emotional. The next round of applications for security officer positions will be in 3 months. I hope you will change your mind by then. He turned to leave, but paused and looked back. You know, a fragile egg striking a stone is utterly futile. Reflect on this, that I watched him gradually walk toward the disinfection chamber, a surge of impulse urging me to call out to him, to confess my emotionality. Yet, I held my tongue. Upon returning to my abode, the day had waned. As I entered the room, I noticed her gaze softened considerably, prompting a bitter smile from me. Had I truly forsaken a valuable opportunity for a trivial belief? It was not such noble intent. At this moment, I comprehended the true greatness of my colleagues who had chosen to end their lives, that in this era, we find it impossible to live without remorse. The following day, I took my vehicle out. As I rounded a street corner, I was suddenly struck by the sound of cries emanating from an abandoned store. I halted, leaped from the car, and made my way inside. 2 burly men, unadorned in protective gear, were pinning a figure clad in such attire to the ground. The voice revealed it to be a woman that I brandished my firearm and commanded, stop. One of the men lifted his head, chuckling derisively, and retorted, just a crow, mind your own business and leave. My buddy here doesn't have long to live, let him enjoy himself. I gazed at the individual on the ground, a woman in her 30s, adorned with jewelry, even in such dire circumstances. I raised my weapon again, insisting, step away. If you are indeed aware of your impending fate, you should be even less inclined to harm others. He drew a knife from his waist, sneering, a filthy crow preaching morality. If I believed your nonsense, I wouldn't have ended up like this. Step aside, and if you have the guts, shoot me. I disengaged the safety. A few months prior, I would have fired without hesitation, yet now I found myself wavering. In that moment of indecision, he hurled the knife at me. I dodged, the blade grazing my arm before embedding itself in the wall behind me that I fired. His body jerked, then fell gracefully to the ground, blood pooling beneath him like a serpent. The other man sprang up, his demeanor lacking the earlier bravado, replaced instead by a look of pleading and despair. I raised my gun once more, commanding, leave, and the farther away, the better. The woman scrambled to her feet, futilely attempting to cover her tattered protective gear, kicking at the fallen man as she cried out, shoot him, kill him. I pushed her aside and directed my attention to the fleeing man. You need to go? Do you truly want me to shoot? He turned and fled. The woman began to strike me, exclaiming, why did you let him go? Do you know my father was once the governor? I shoved her away, stating, Miss, remove your protective suit. You are no longer worthy of wearing it. She retorted, I'm not worthy? And you are. It was then I realized that the knife had indeed torn through my protective gear. A streak of blood marred my arm. Though this seemed trivial, I understood the implications. Countless viruses had already infiltrated the wound, and I began to shed my protective attire, conceding, yes, you are correct. She appeared nearly stunned. As I removed the suit, a sense of relief washed over me, and I urged, now, take off your protective gear. Upon returning to my dwelling, I refrained from entering the room. The stringent disinfection measures within held no significance for me anymore. Given that the infection had entered through the wound, the rate of contamination was swift, and I could already feel hardness forming around the injury. I lay on the ground, fully clothed, gazing up at the starry sky. It had been ages since I last beheld the stars. Their twinkling beauty was exquisite. Since time immemorial, they have existed, perhaps bearing witness to life on distant planets and the myriad joys and sorrows that accompany it, that I too wear a semblance of a bitter smile, that is only during such moments that I can catch a fleeting glimpse of the starry sky. How much can one truly experience in a lifetime? In the vast ocean, a grain of sand bears no distinction from Mount Sumeru, and in the boundless cosmos, what significance does the ocean hold? Such arrogance. Though the Yalong may be small, does the Han possess the right to mock others? I find myself resting in the warm embrace of ash. Those ashes seem to possess a semblance of life, floating through the air and descending like swathes of fireflies. The moonlight is gentle, her shimmering gaze akin to flowing waters. Yet I do not dream. When the security officer arrived, I remained in slumber, unaware of his presence. He left me a substantial bundle of food, sufficient to sustain me for 2 months. Each day, I continue to gather statues, incinerating them. Life is invariably diverse. Yet I have resolved never to destroy her, that I find myself immobilized. The virus has proliferated extensively, rendering my body swiftly petrified. Although my eyes retain their sight, I ponder whether if my entire being were to become completely stone, I would still be able to see that if I were to exert force to move, it is indeed feasible. Beneath my petrified skin, my muscles maintain a degree of vitality and elasticity, enough to facilitate movement. However, such an endeavor would inevitably lead to fissures in my skin, of course. This does not inflict pain. Despite the potential for a gruesome appearance, the nerve endings have long since turned to stone, incapable of transmitting sensations of pain. They may still convey pain, but that would take an eternity, perhaps a year, 2 years, or even 100 or 1,000 years that I do not wish for my body to be riddled with wounds. I merely endeavor to cautiously and painstakingly shift my feet, striving to propel my body forward. How much can I move each day? A micrometer? An anemometer? This distance of over a meter feels like an insurmountable divide to me. Yet, in a millennium or two, I shall embrace her waist, and my lips shall meet hers. I await in serene anticipation. Students, the professor proclaimed from the podium, you may recall from previous lectures that 6,000 years ago marked the dawn of human civilization. It was long believed that the civilization of this era was rudimentary, perhaps only capable of wielding fire. However, the recent discovery of 2 sculptures may overturn our long-held beliefs. He unveiled a white cloth from the podium, revealing the 2 sculptures before the students. As you can see, these sculptures are remarkably lifelike. Despite their overly realistic flaws and somewhat erroneous expressions, a male figure exudes excessive fervor, while the female appears too aloof. One can observe that the proportions of a human form are executed with considerable precision, nearly suitable for life drawing. After sharing a jest, he continued, the artistic issues are not our focus today. I intend to discuss the technological prowess of that era. Previously, we assumed that iron tools could not have existed at that time. But one point may prove us wrong, for such craftsmanship would be impossible without iron. Observe, he said, lifting a sheet of paper and placing it between the faces of the 2 figures. Take note of the distance between their lips, which is merely 2 millimeters.